I call the honourable member, Andrew Williams.
Thank you,
Mr. Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I take a call on behalf of New Zealand First for the Taxation, Livestock, Valuation, Assets, Expenditure and Remedial Matters Bill, and in this respect New Zealand First will not be supporting this bill as we do hold a number of reservations concerning it. While New Zealand First does support good policy and does support moves to improve taxation, we do believe there are some reservations concerning this in regards to two factors, and the first being new farmers having reduced autonomy by having purchased herds, and secondly due to debt stacking. Firstly, on the new farmer situation, under this basis, herd scheme valuations began in the late 1980s. The idea was to effectively treat livestock as a capital asset. Under the herd scheme, changes to the value of their livestock were not subject to tax. In 2003 and 2009, many farmers left the herd scheme, predicting that livestock values would decrease. They did not want to pay a higher tax rate than what their livestock was actually worth, and that's understandable. This government, this national government, has since announced that farmers cannot elect to exit the herd scheme. The National Party, is surprising, considering a big chunk of their support comes from the likes of Federated Farmers, as we heard earlier in the Local Government Act. But the National Party likes to pride itself on individual responsibility, but it will not allow individual farmers this fundamental control over their assets. Under this new piece of legislation, herd scheme livestock sold to an associated party will also be required to remain under that same scheme. So someone's new asset will be subject to a scheme either accepted or rejected by a previous owner. We do not believe New Zealand First that is fair, and once again we think that feel that the government is doing a disservice to their very constituents, the farmers of New Zealand, by adopting this, and that has been the feedback from many farming circles in respect to it. Secondly, in regards to debt stacking, KPMG have come out also advising that they have concerns about the debt stacking aspect to this, and I quote, they say, for mixed-use assets held by a close company, the concern is that all interest deductions in respect of the asset will be allowed under the general interest deductibility provision for companies, and or the debt might not be in the company itself. Therefore, an interest apportionment rule is proposed to address situations where debt is in the company or its shareholders' hands. So there are some, and they go on to give examples of debt stacking complications and how it would not necessarily work. And so when you have the likes of KPMG on the one hand raising some doubts about the debt stacking side of this, and when you have some in farming circles saying they don't feel it's right that they cannot withdraw from a herd scheme that is somewhat historic, and they don't want to be in it any longer, but this government is requiring them to stay, then we feel that there's some errors in the way this legislation has been brought to the House. But perhaps it's symptomatic of a wider rust or rot in terms of this, because we have heard on some of the other bills where the government has focused on tinkering around the edges with such as taxes for paper boys and paper girls in this country, and attacking those that can least, afford taxation changes, while at the same time giving huge tax relief, several billions of dollars to their rich mates, the wealthy, the top 10% earners of New Zealand. The $5 million telecom man who got $4,000 or $5,000 a week in tax relief. The Prime Minister who got $1,000 a week more in tax deduction. Those sorts of things, it's all very well. But then they go and attack their very own supporters, the farmers of New Zealand with their herds and other aspects, which is not right. And this is at a time, Mr. Speaker, where New Zealand has record unemployment. We've got massive overseas debt and rising. The balance of payments is appalling and predicted to rise even further, and where the manufacturing sector is in crisis and indeed in meltdown. But what does this government do through all this? It just basically tinkers around the edges with the taxes such as this bill, and really doesn't get on with the bigger picture of growing the pie in New Zealand, growing the economy, growing the opportunities for jobs and employment, giving younger people an opportunity in this country to actually leave university or leave school, leave education and get into a worthwhile career. but they tinker around the edges with silly little bills like this herd management scheme. So, Mr. Speaker, New Zealand First will not be supporting this bill, and we oppose it.
I call the honourable member